Hi, I'm Donna Davis. I'm here with Richard Cole, the founder of Cole's Wild Bird Products. And Richard is here to answer all of your birding questions today. So feel free to write in the comments whatever your question is, and we hope we can get to it today. And thank you for joining us. We hope you have been having a nice day and a good afternoon. And Richard, let's first talk about fall's just started. So what are some of the things we need to know about fall? First of all, seems like there's a little bit of a slowdown in the bird feeding, right?
Yes, there is. I've been calling this fall slowdown. And people get worried about where their birds went. They're putting out the good seed, they're doing everything right, and all of a sudden there's no birds. This is a good time of year for food for the birds. Everything wild is ready and ripe. All the weeds that grew all summer long are now ripe with seeds. They can eat those. A lot of the bushes and berries, even poison ivy berries are ripe, and they'll eat the poison ivy berries. So there's a lot of natural food available. Spiders, we had talked about before the show, there's a lot of spiders out there. Around Halloween time, you see them everywhere. Well, they're all through the woods. So there's a lot of tasty little insects for the birds to eat. And so they don't need our provided food, but they're getting a lot of natural food. So you see a lot less activity. You're not doing anything wrong. It's okay. Just keep up what you're doing. They'll be back.
So you talked about it's a fall harvest, really, for the birds, just like it is for anybody else. All the seeds, all the bugs, everything, and the bugs have. And I had wondered, like, well, why spiders now? I thought more in the summer, but it's because they're all hatching, right?
Yes, they've had all summer long to breed. Now there's more insects. There's no killing frost yet, so there's a lot of insects out there. This is a peak time for them. And like I said, all the weeds, all the vegetation out there, if it has seeds and things that birds can eat, it's ripe and ready.
But you did want to emphasize, too, a lot of times people stop putting the bird seed out, and then they think, like, well, they don't need it, right? But be sure to keep putting it out, because they will certainly need it in the winter, right?
Absolutely. Two things we'd heard for years and years as we got into this business is, come springtime, you take the feeders down, they don't need it, and don't put your feeders out until it gets cold. Neither one of those are really that great of advice. If you have your feed out now, if they do need some, they'll come by and get it. They'll move out and take the natural food when they want to. That's why you don't see as many birds, hence the fall slowdown. But as you get into winter, they'll need it more. And if locally they run out, they've got your feeders. And a lot of people, as soon as it gets warm in early April, in mid-March even, they'll bring their feeders in. Oh, it's springtime, but there's no food available for them yet. All the weeds and all haven't grown back. All the berries aren't there. So it's very difficult for them. So make sure you have the food out early spring. And breeding season is coming up on there. They'll need the food.
Yeah, and this brings to mind our question from last month that we didn't get to, was that we had somebody who asked about bluebirds, and will they eat, traditionally they've eaten insects, but will they eat seed?
Absolutely. We've been in this business a long time. One of the things that really surprised me was bluebirds coming to the bird feeders. Now, if you put out standard hardware type mix, no, they're not going to do much there because there's nothing there for them to eat. But with Cole's, we have a lot of sunflower meats without the shell in all of our blends, and that's an insect substitute. It's soft, it's nutritious, and it's very healthy for them. They love it. And all of a sudden, you start seeing bluebirds coming to the seed feeders, eating the whole sunflower. And that's kind of nice. And we have other birds that typically don't eat shelled seed or seeds with shells because they can't crack it. They'll come and pick up the sunflower meats. So if you have sunflower meats in your blends, we have a lot of those at Cole's. For that reason, you'll see a lot of these birds coming to your feeder you wouldn't see normally.
Yeah, we use the sunflower meats, but we use it in a little house with a tiny opening so that, like, not all the starlings and things like that can just come in and just raid your sunflower meats, because those are pretty, I consider that like a, the finer foods, the delicacies for your bluebirds.
And it's not inexpensive, and you don't want every bird coming in, and the big birds can take a lot of seed away in a hurry. So you can also use smaller feeders if they become a problem, especially when the grackles are here. We're just getting out of that season. Thank goodness the large hordes of grackles and blackbirds have moved through the area, and they're not eating all of our seed. So I can put out larger trays of sunflower meats and fruit and nut blend and for them, and without worried about the grackles taking it off.
Yeah, so while we're talking about bluebirds and things like that, let's talk about fall is also a time to look at cleaning your feeders and cleaning out the birdhouses, right?
Oh, absolutely, it sure is. The breeding season is pretty much over with now. The birds aren't going to need the birdhouses because they only use those for breeding. There's some exceptions in the wintertime when it's really cold. Some of the birds will come back in and spend the night. They're not living there, per se, like they do during the breeding season. So you want to clean out. It's a great time to go ahead and clean out out your birdhouses and make sure that you get all the old nesting material out, because there's insects in that, and you don't want it, like feather lice and stuff will actually be in those nests. In fact, after each brood of bluebirds, especially because they're going to have 3 or 4 a year, go in there and just clean that house out. I flip my door open, I hose it out, leave it open for a couple of days, then close it back. They'll come back and put nesting material back in there to start their next brood. In the fall time, they're not going to come back and put nesting material in, so I hose it out, let it dry, and then I just take a little pine straw or have some moss or something, just put a little small bed of something in the bottom of the house. They'll go in there and use it for nesting in the wintertime or just for shelter sometimes. Not a lot, but every now and then you'll see some. One of the things that's interesting, bluebirds that maybe move down into your area from up north, and perhaps when they're up north and it gets a little cool, they will get together, and you might not be surprised to see 3 or 4 bluebirds inside of one nesting box on a cold night.
Yeah. That's so sweet. I always thought until I met you that birds made a nest and they came back to that all the time to sleep. But of course now I know they don't. So let's talk about hummingbirds and what we should do with our feeders now. A lot of people think, well, the summer's over, the migration is ended, and I'll take my feeders up. What do you say to that?
Yeah, no, no. The migration is still underway. If you're further north, most of the birds are out of there. The vast majority of them are. Further down south, like here, most of the migration's over with. There's some stragglers still moving through. We may see some more coming through into maybe mid-November. That's pretty late for them. But if they're coming through, you don't want to have taken a feeder down. If you've got 5 or 6 feeders out, take most of them down if you want to and clean them up to store them. But leave 2 feeders out so they're visible. And if a bird comes by, a straggler, a late arrival, they've got some food. The sides, those are not the only birds that are here. In the East Coast, we have mostly ruby-throats. They all move to the south. In the west, there's other birds, more species than here, all moving to the south, going down to Central America. But especially here in the east and mostly the southeast, a lot of the birds in the west will move into the southeast for the winter and not go down to Central America. So if you leave a feeder out, you've got a chance of seeing one of these birds and perhaps helping it when it comes to overwinter in South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and in some cases, Michigan. We've seen birds and had birds reported spending a winter over there. They have a better chance of survival in the southeast. You have a better chance of seeing them if you leave a feeder out for them.
Okay, so that brings to mind another question for you about hummingbirds. I understand that you've had the pleasure of having a hummingbird come and light on your finger. Tell us about how you could possibly do that. I would love that.
It takes a little patience. It's not that hard to do, but you have to be patient. If you get them coming to a feeder, on a deck or out in the yard on a pole, just get a chair, make sure you're comfortable, sit 5 or 8 feet away and be still. They'll come to the feeder. Get a little closer to the feeder. Give them some time. Late afternoon is a good time to do this when they really want to tank up before they go to bed. Maybe after 4 o'clock to the 5 o'clock range when you're seeing that afternoon burst of activity. And then keep encroaching in their territory. They'll run away. They'll come back in a few minutes wanting to feed. This may take a day. It may take 2 or 3 afternoons. Just go ahead and get the feeder, hold it up, prop your arm up on the arm of the chair so it doesn't move a lot. You won't get tired of holding it. And just wait. And don't look right at the bird. Look off to the side. Birds tend to recognize eyes. And they know you're looking at them. And I'll mention something about owls I may have mentioned before in a minute. But just avoid them, and they'll come back in a little bit. They'll start with the feeder. Let them get comfortable doing that. Don't let them drink too much. They'll tank up, go away, and not come back. So as soon as they get their bill in, take a sip or two, wiggle the feeder, or look at them, let them go away and come back. It's just a little process of getting them used to coming, spooking them off so they don't get filled up, so they'll come back. And then you just come up with a hand with a small feeder and put your hand right there. I use something like this and a small feeder so it don't wiggle too much, and they'll eventually come and finally just sit down on your finger and you got them. Once they get used to doing that, they'll keep doing it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's got to be fascinating. Do you remember the first time you did it?
No, 'cause I've done it.
Yeah.
I've done it a lot.
Now you're so used to it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we did it just to see if it could be done, because you see this, you hear about it. So, oh yeah, it really wasn't that hard. I think it took me maybe an hour. It was that quick. I would say it would be that quick for everybody, but there was a lot of birds. They were hungry, and it wasn't hard at all. And it's like, oh, they'll just do this, and I got my wife to do it, and it went on her finger, and we've shown some other people that, yeah, you can do this. Of course, you don't want to try to catch them or anything, but you can certainly let them sit on your finger.
That's neat. That's so neat. So, do you, you've also talked about how your wild birds have gotten really comfortable with you. Like when you go out to feed them, they almost start telling you, like, hurry up and feed us, right? They don't get scared and fly away like they
Not as much. Once they get used to the situation, this is their yard, their feeders. You're just an intruder sometimes. They'll spook off the feeders, but if you stand still for a few minutes, they'll start coming back. We sit on our back porch, 7 feet from the railing where several feeders are. You walk out there, most of them, or perhaps with the exception of white-breasted nuthatches, are a little more tame than a lot of birds. They'll rush off and run over the trees, and then you just sit there and be still for a few minutes. They start coming back. I could even sit and we could be having a conversation. They'll just ignore you and start eating.
Yeah.
And the hummingbirds, of course, sometimes will do a flyby just to check you out.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting to sit there and watch the birds that close.
So that's really great that you can, keep your feeders out is that throughout most of the United States or just the southeast where you can keep your feeders out and at least see maybe a few hummingbirds? Like what parts of the United States could you do that in?
Everywhere.
Everywhere?
Everywhere. Yeah.
Wow.
Just, there might not be a bird. Your chances of seeing a bird in the wintertime are pretty low.
Yeah.
But it's possible, because a lot of the birds, like I said, a lot of the birds in the west, and I suspect the ruby-throats in the east, don't all go south. Something's wrong with the wiring, or maybe something's right to preserve the species. Some of them will go maybe west. Some of them may go north. Probably won't survive. But the ones that go maybe west maybe end up in California and survive in a mild climate and come back here for the breeding season. That happens because here in Georgia, we have now 12 or so species recorded to be in this state. 11 of which are in the wintertime, western species that are here during the winter and spend the winter here, survive and come back. We know this because a lot of them are captured and banded with a professional bander. And then the next year you see a bird at the same person's feeder and you pick it up and there it is with the band on it. And you see this bird repeat this for 3, 4, 5 years. So you know this is what that bird is supposed to do. So you got a chance of seeing this. So keep a feeder out all winter.
And you keep a couple of hummingbird feeders out, don't you?
Oh, yes.
And have you done the banding? You do the banding, right?
Yes, I don't have a license to band. I go with the professional banders who do have the federal permits to trap and band the hummingbirds. And I was fortunate enough to be early on the process of trying to find out what these birds are doing and start reporting that there's birds here in the wintertime. And everybody says, no, there can't be. Oh, they're going to die. And to find out they weren't the species that's normally here, they were western species. And that's how we ended up having our 12 or more species in Georgia. And our one normal species is one of the rare birds in the wintertime, because for the most part, they're out of here.
How do they survive? They're so tiny. It takes so much fuel for them to just get through the day. How do they survive during the cold?
You have to remember, or you have to realize, that they don't just drink sugar water. There's not really any nutritional value there. It's pure energy. So what do they eat? It's not sugar water, it's insects. These little guys are very good at hawking insects, gnats and little flies, and especially spiders. They'll grab them and eat them. So I was fortunate enough to be at a banding. Somebody reported a hummingbird. It was probably in December or January. It was very cold. There was still some snow on the ground next to the house. And we went out to see this hummingbirds coming to a feeder. and I was over by the side of the house, out of the way, waiting on the bird, and I realized it's about 34 degrees outside, and there was gnats flying around next to the side of the house, by the bushes. Oh, they're warm, they're fine.
Yeah.
That's what this bird's also eating.
Right.
These guys are here, and the birds know how to find them.
Okay, so we have a question. We have one question in about some really ugly cardinals at the feeders lately. Like they're missing feathers and looking a little diseased. Should he be worried? Is there anything he can do?
No, don't be worried. The first time I heard about it, some lady came to me and started describing this bird she had seen. And it was just bizarre sounding. It made no sense. It had this little bitty head, a really large beak, and it was purple. But the rest of it was red, kind of like a cardinal. And I said, you got to get a picture of this bird. And the lady did and brought it in and said, oh, it's a bald-headed cardinal. Makes sense. You start looking, there's feather lice and things like that. Besides, these birds go through a natural molt where all their feathers have to come out and new feathers grow in. If that doesn't go perfectly, then one part of their anatomy may be bald. Sometimes they'll lose a lot of their wing feathers. They'll still have enough to fly, but not well, because they don't need to migrate at the time. But they'll look really funny at that point. Generally, the baldness is on the head, maybe a combination of molting and feather lice. They'll be fine. It doesn't appear to bother them. They just look really strange for a while.
Do all wild birds do that? Because I notice it mostly with cardinals. I don't notice it with my bluebirds and that sort of thing.
It's more noticeable with cardinals. I don't know why, but every bird tends to molt every year, some more than once. So if you think about it, during the year, they're going to lose every one of their feathers and replace them. Because they do get worn down. You'll see some of the birds start to change color slightly. Some of the new feathers will change color as the edges wear off. That happens, you'll notice in goldfinches, as the new feathers grow in, they'll get really bright, especially the males. And the females, you don't see a big change in them. But if you ever get these birds to look at the edge of the feathers before the molt, they're really worn down. The hummingbirds go through this also, and they'll molt after, when they get down to the wintering grounds down in Central America, they'll finish the molt process and come back with new feathers. So you see a lot of female hummingbirds, as we've seen in the last 2 months. A lot of those female hummingbirds are actually young males. And you may see 1 or 2 little dots here, and that's all. And they still have a white tipped tail, which is indicative of a female hummingbird. The males, rubies those. The males have sort of a forked tail with no white spots. So that bird moves through. It may have a red dot or two, but it still have the female-looking tail. When it comes back up here next year, it'll be a full male with a full gorget feathers in and a male tail with no white feathers. It would have lost all of them and changed.
Yeah, it is amazing to see all the changes that they go through. So I just want to invite everybody to whatever your birding question is, and we all have them from time to time. Richard is such an expert. He's been watching birds for years and came up with the best seed in order to attract more birds. So please go to our Facebook page and just go to the comments and ask a question during the broadcast. We're going to be broadcasting for, let's see, it's 3:18. We'll wrap it up at around 3:30. So go ahead and ask your questions. So I'm going to ask the question about bluebirds. So my husband and I really wanted to attract bluebirds, right? So we got the seeds, we got all the right things to attract them, the worms, everything. So we finally got the nesting boxes, and they took a long time, but now they're nesting. It always seems like when the babies start to learn to fly, they take them away. I mean, it seems like they're taking them over to maybe a neighbor's yard, and then we'll see the whole family come back to come to our feeders. But tell me a little bit about that process.
It's time to get out and learn the ways of life, of being a bluebird. I guess it's kind of like going on vacation for them. Once they get the young out, they're not bound to that nest box anymore.
Yeah, they're not. They don't even stay in the yard, and they've got all this food.
When the female has the young, she's got to stay right there with the eggs. The male's always close by. In the case of bluebirds, it's not always that way.
They really partner, yeah.
Yes, they do. But she has to be there, so she can't go far. Once the young get out, they're not restricted. They're not tethered to that nest box anymore. They can get out and move around. Yes, even though you have some food out for them that they'll eat, like sunflower meats and dried mealworms, they're going around learning how to forage. And there's other food out there all the time.
Yeah.
They don't, it seems like the birds spend the entire time of their life sometimes right at your feeder. That's really not the case.
Yeah.
You think you've got this one chickadee that stays there all day long, you probably have 5 or 6 different chickadees that are coming and going.
Yeah.
And the bluebirds, they'll come back by, but they're out learning how to find insects and food on their own.
Yeah, it seems like once they learn to fly, we don't see them again for a while, and then you'll see like the juveniles who can't fly very well and coming back to the feeders and that kind of thing. So let's talk about birds that are good for ground feeders. Like I've noticed that the doves are not going to come to the feeders unless we have a really big feeder, a big platform. So what kind of birds are going to want ground food, and what ones are good for the feeders that are up off the ground?
Remember the grackles we talked about? They're really good at on the ground. They'll come up to feeders when they can get there, but they'll go around. The doves certainly are ground feeders. Rufous-sided towhees and the other towhees in the U.S., they love to scratch around on the ground. The towhee gives away its heritage of being in a sparrow clan by jumping forward, scratching once or twice, and jumping back. It's a telltale sign. And so they're down there scratching around the ground looking for weed seeds and insects on the ground. You'll see most birds will go to the ground occasionally to feed, and some of them more than others. Doves spend their life on the ground. And you'll see the towhees down there. A lot of the sparrow clan spend a lot of time foraging for insects on the ground.
So any other bird feeding tips that you might have, that particularly in the fall, that you think maybe we should talk about?
Yeah, if you want to keep the birds happy in the fall, of course the Coles bird seed, we've worked on that for years to get the ingredients right that makes good general all-around feeding. Like sunflower meats are very important, and the Coles special feeder has a little bit of everything with a lot of sunflower meats in it. That gives, as I said, the birds who don't eat shells, they can't crack them. A wren's a good example. They can't crack a shell, but they can certainly pick up a sunflower meat because it's like a bug. And so you put that out, you put the shells out. For the cardinals have no trouble with shells. All the finches have no trouble with shells. So you just put out good quality seed. I hear a lot about, what do I feed now? It's wintertime as opposed to summertime. Pretty much the same thing, a good quality blend or several feeders with straight seeds in them. And also, if you want to change something, as you get into the wintertime, if you put out suet, suet's always a good food for the birds, especially in the wintertime. It's got a lot of fat in it. All the birds can eat it. As you get into the warm months, you may want to use what they call suet dough, which has a little more cornmeal in all it, so it doesn't tend to melt or get too soft. As you get into the wintertime, you can use the regular suets that don't have the dough mix in it. And because they have a higher fat content, they may tend to melt in July, but as you get into the fall, they're fine.
Right.
And that's a good food to put out for the birds.
Speaking of birds that you want to attract, I had seen on, there's these neighborhood association things where that are out online, and somebody had put today that their woodpecker, there had been a woodpecker that pecked at their siding so much they were asking for somebody, who could do siding replacement. What do you do if you have a woodpecker that's kind of relentless on your house? Oh,
gee, that's a tough one, and that happens to people. It tends to happen more on houses that look more like old wood.
Oh, really?
The grays, the tan and brown houses.
Just get a blue house, right?
Yeah, blue houses don't get attacked very often, but they'll do that and trying to drill a nesting cavity. In some cases, they're looking for food if they hear an insect, especially in an edge around a window or something. If there's an insect in there, maybe a carpenter bee has drilled a hole, they'll pound directly on that. But if they're knocking a big round hole, they're looking for a nesting cavity. They can start on it now, just about. They get ready for the springtime before they can use it. But they'll get in and maybe they'll nest in the side of your house. There's not a lot you can do. If they're starting to damage your house, you can put a tarp on that area. They can't land on it. They can't peck in it. They'll get discouraged and go. You can go out and throw some ice cubes at them or shoot the hose at them every now and then, just to discourage them. That's somewhat effective. Other than that, enjoy them and repair the house later.
Well, it sounds like that was their attitude. So we do have one more question. One of our viewers would like to know, they would love to be able to attract to attract the birds, but she has a cat.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can do if you have a cat and you still want to feed the birds?
Sell the cat? That's not going to work, is it? No.
What about a big bell on its collar? Maybe not?
No, that's not going to work so much, because by the time everybody hears the bell, the cat's on the bird. It's, if you have a feeder up off the ground, put a tray on it so very little hits the ground, the cat's not going to get the bird up in the air. So that works pretty well. If you have a feeder that's on a pole or in the yard, don't have anything that the cat can hide behind within 15 feet. Don't put your feeder right next to a little hedgerow. It's only 5 or 6 feet away, because the cat will get the birds. So just watch where you position the feeder. Make sure there's plenty of sight line for the birds to be able to see any predators lurking there. And if you have to have a hedgerow and you have to have your feeder there, get some chicken wire, maybe 1.5 foot or 2 foot high. It's really cheap at the hardware store. Just tuck it down right along the base of your bushes. It'll hardly even show up. The cat can't run through it to get your birds.
Oh, that's
That'll
a good idea.
let you put the feeder close to your bushes without anybody running in and getting the birds.
Yeah, because the cats, they just love that. There's just like, it's in their blood to do that. So, and you don't want to end up with a yard that's not conducive for your birds at all. But, so I was going to ask you something along the lines of the cats and the, so we have a dog, and it's so funny because she doesn't even try for the birds anymore. She used to run after them, but now she knows, like, she's never going to catch them. And it doesn't even seem like they're afraid of her.
Yeah.
You know, do you have a dog? I know you bird.
No.
Yeah,
no.
So your birds are kind of like your pets,
That's our
right?
pets. Yeah, the birds are our pets.
And how long have you been feeding them?
Wow. A long time. I would say 30 or 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So most of what you've learned is through observation, but you've also gone to some courses and that kind of thing,
well,
right?
There's a lot of resources available out there, but most of what I've learned was from just trial and error.
Yeah.
And then you read a little bit, you talk to somebody who's doing the birds, and if you have access to a retail store that sells wild bird supplies, which I did, of course, you hear all the customers.
Right.
They're constantly educating you. So
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to listen to that for 25 years.
Right.
And so you hear every single story. Some of them are ridiculous, some of them are funny, but there's a lot of good information buried in those stories.
I know, I can't believe how much you know. I call you over every birding thing that I get, and you always seem to have an answer. But let's talk about one burning issue that people always have, and I'm just trying to update to see if we have any new questions or anything here. One big question, and I don't know if we can do it in a couple of minutes we have left, but everybody always wants to know, how do you keep the squirrels away?
You know what my answer is? Shotgun.
Oh, stop. Other than that.
No, you can't do that. That's not nice. But there is things you can do. I had people used to swear to me, you cannot stop the squirrels. If you keep doing the same thing and they keep getting on it, no, you can't. But there are things you can do. You can position a feeder so it's hard to get to the squirrel too. I had some people put it on a little thin line in the middle, 8 feet from everything. The squirrel has a hard time getting across the line. Some will hang upside down and shimmy to it. But there's food that you can put in your feeders. If you can't put your feeder someplace the squirrel can't get to, or put it someplace where you can have a proper baffle, or a tough bird feeder guard, which is an electronic device used to give the squirrels a little training shot when they try to reach the feeder. If you have that, you can solve the problem on a feeder. There's some feeders that prevent the squirrels from getting to the food by having a tray mechanism that blocks the seed port. But Cole's hot meats, pure sunflower meats infused with chili pepper oil, is too hot for the squirrels to eat. Birds can't taste the pepper. The heat means nothing to them. But the squirrels, being mammals like us, it's a little too hot for their taste. So you can have a food like that, they will not eat it. So every now and then a squirrel will taste a little bit, but they don't like it. Birds love the stuff. So you can put a food like Cole's hot meats in your feeder, problem solved. And like I said, there's feeders, you can put them out and away from everything, or on a pole with a squirrel baffle underneath. As long as it's about 5 foot high, they won't be able to get past the baffle to that. And if you don't have it next to a bush or a tree, they can't jump to the feeder from that. You can stop them. It's not super easy, but it can be done.
But a lot of people know Kohl's for that because it's just such a huge problem, and you guys came up with the hot meats, and it's been such a successful solution for a lot of people. Right?
It really has, and really one of the things it allows you to do is put a feeder where you want to put the feeder,
right,
without all the hardware hanging on it, and enjoy the birds. Like some people really say, I want the feeder right here on my porch,
right,
where I can see it, but there's no way to stop the squirrels from getting to it. The Kohl's Hot Meats gives you that opportunity to put your little feeder right there in the window or right on the porch without worrying about the squirrels tearing it up along with eating all your food.
Right, so you just go to kohlswildbird.com and check out all
Absolutely.
the many hot meats products.
Yes.
Thanks so much for being with us and answering questions. Don't forget that Richard Kohl is here every first Wednesday of the month at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time to answer all of your burning birding questions. So thanks, Richard.
Well, thank you.